Okay, so in this, we've done the first part, we've done the second part. Now we need to look at this create database helper class. And we need to examine this carefully and what does it do for us, all right? So let's go back to the main activity, to go to our project that we're working with. And let's talk about this thing called helper class. What is a helper class? The helper class is a class, Java class, that extend SQLite open helper class. And it provides us the mechanism to create the database, update the database, create the tables, interact with the database, all right? So that is an essential class that we need to include in our project. So I'm going to go back to the same application, same package, and right-click and do new Java class. And I'm gonna call it right-click and new Java class, and we're gonna call it MyDB class, my helper. Okay. Okay. MyDB helper. Let's call it that way. The MyDB helper. God. I hate that. I'm not using a mouse, so this is a problem. Okay, MyDB helper. Okay. So this is my class. It's nothing but a Java class, but what we're going to do to it, what we're going to do, we're going to say, okay, the first step we're going to do, we're going to say, this it's going to be a child of SQLite. When you start typing this, you will see SQLite open helper class. So that's the one that we're going to use. Now, don't get scared, because there are things that we need to do before making this actually working. The first thing you need to do is that you see this light bulb. It says you need some methods that are necessary for this class to work. One of these methods is called implement the methods required by this class, which is two methods. I'm going to select both of those. One of them is called Oncreate and OnUpgrade. All right. We'll still have an error. We'll fix the error in a minute. But let's take a look. Let's take a look at what are these methods. So I have a method called Oncreate. What is the purpose of this method? If you look at the documentation for SQLite, the purpose of this method is to do what? Is to create all table creation happens here. All table creation and initialization happens here, right? So initialization, I think I misspelled it. Initialization. So happens here. What does that mean? That means that if you want to, we have a member class here that we need member table that we wanted to store information about that member. So I need to be, the first time I reference the database, I need to create the table, make sure that table that exists. So that's where you do that part in this method. So we'll get back to that one in a minute. And what about the other method? The other method that we have is what? The other method that we have is this method, which is what? The OnUpgrade. What does that do? This method gets called when you create a new version of the database. So when you create, it gets called when a new version of the database is created. All right. So what do we do in this method? We usually do what? So we usually either in the documentation again, you drop in previous tables, or you alter them. Alter them, you mean you update them. You add columns, delete columns, whatever, all right? So those are two important methods that you have to take care of when you're dealing with your database. SQLite in Android Studio. All right, so what about this error we still have here? Okay, it says there is a problem, there is no default constructor, there is no constructor. Okay, so you can select this one, which is matching the super parameters for this class, for this SQL helper class. So I'm gonna do that. How do we do that? I'm gonna select the first constructor that I received, which is basically, I have few parameters, and I'll explain those parameters for you in a minute. So I'm gonna select that one and hit OK. Now the error is gone. So what does this constructor do? It will call the super class helper and it passes to it some important information. What are these important information? First of all, a reference to your application, so it knows where to find the database, the context, the name of your database, and how to generate the factory, how to generate the tables, okay? And then the version of the database. So the version at the beginning, it starts with 1. This one is going to be null. You can check again the documentation on SQLite and to get more details on this. And this is our, we have control over this, and we have control over this. But I don't want to pass all this information externally. I want to get this information from within my helper class. The only thing that I would receive is a reference to the application. So all the rest I'm going to delete, except for the context. Now I'm gonna get errors, of course, but we'll solve those in a minute. So how do we hard code this information here? This one we can just type in null here because this is going to be null, all right? But what about the version and what about the name? Now, you can hard code the database name, and that is okay. Or you can create the common practice, the standard practice is to do what? The standard practice is to create constant variables that would contain the information related to this, all right? And I'll show you how we create that, okay? Okay. So how, as I said, that we usually create constant variable for this. I already did that, and I have the code, so just saving time. So I have the database name here. And then I have here and I'm gonna go back to the DB helper class, and I'm gonna include this in my class, okay? So what do we have here? I have these, let's forget about this guy for a minute. So I've created public static final string, a variable called DB name. Here is my DB name, member DB, public static final int DB version. So instead of using the database name here, hard coding it here, I just simply reference those constants. And this is a very useful common practice. Why? Because you don't need to remember the variable, the field names, the table names, the database name. Or you use the variable that represent them. Okay. So my database name is going to be called members DB, and the version now is 1. All right. So instead of this, we can use DB name. And then instead of this, I'm going to use DB version. all right? And I deleted something, so we'll put it back, all right? So now this class is happy, all right? No errors, no issues, okay? So what do we do? Let's examine those two in a minute in more details. So here it says Oncreate, it received the SQLite database. And this is called SQLite database. You can call it whatever you want to call it. We can change that to call it DB for short. And then we can change that as well to DB for short. So this, whenever this method get called, you get reference to the database that you created in the constructor, all right? So the constructor, when you call the constructor, will create the database. And when I call this method, I will get reference to this database to perform any operation against these databases, all right? So what do we do next? So we go back, whenever we want to use this, let's go back, say you create the database helper class, and then the next one is to perform the CRUD operation against this database helper class. So what happens typically in this situation? What happens, you first create an object of this class. Where do we create the object for this class? We create the object in this class in wherever we need to access it. We only have one class right now, which is the main activity. So in the main activity here, it says call the database helper class to insert the database. We haven't done that part to insert into the database, but we have the part to call the object, to call the class. So how do we call the class? We call the class, create the object. We say, okay, my DB, my helper. So remember, what did we call it? My DB helper, right? My DB helper, my helper equal what? Equal new, and my helper class, my DB helper, and I need to pass to it the parameter. What parameter do we pass to it? We pass to it a reference to your application, and in this case, it's going to be this. So now it will be just like that. So my helper class equal my DB helper, and then you pass to it the reference. All right. So now, just to test it, and I'll show you what happens if we go back to the my DB helper class, and then I will go here and put a debug here. All right. Point. And then let's debug this code and see what happens. Let me pause for a minute. So now I can type in some information. This one is not important. This one is not important, even though we're gonna not use it. Yeah, and then here, and then the city really doesn't matter right now. And then if I click on insert, what's gonna happen? It's going to go to the helper class, which is this. Now let's examine what happens here. If I step over this, it will call the parent class, and then now we have, it hasn't created the database yet, but we've created the object here. Okay. Why can't I see this here? Okay. All right. So here is this is the name of the database called members. All right. And later on, I'll show you where it is created in your device. All right. So that part is actually working. Okay. So now let's continue with this this exercise. Okay, so let me stop this. Okay, and let's continue. So what do we need to do next? The next thing to do is that you want to create the table, the database, all right? And we're going to do that in the next video, all right? So in the next video, I'll show you how to use the Oncreate method to create the table into the database. All right. So let me start this and start another video.